Hi, everyone. This is Megan.
And this is Steven.
And this is the Synchrony podcast where we talk about transforming apostolic dating culture and ending loneliness in the church.
That's right. And we are in different seats.
Yes, I wanted to switch to see if I can find my angles.
That's right. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see. I've never known where my angles were. I was traditionally very bad at geometry, so I don't have high hopes for that experiment, but we'll see. We'll see how it does. We're coming off of an amazing weekend in West Palm.
Very, very great weekend.
Yeah, it was incredible. Thank you to all of you who came out and hung out with us. It was awesome. Thank you again to the Sanctuary of the Palm Beaches for hosting us.
West Palm.
Yeah, to Iglesia La Roca for hosting us as well,
Yeah.
because they allowed us to use their facilities. It was fantastic.
It was amazing. And we had a lot happen over the weekend.
Yeah, we had.
On Saturday, we're like, oh my goodness. And then Sunday, we're like, oh my goodness.
We had a double engagement weekend.
That's right.
Yeah, we've had actually 3 couples get engaged in the last week. I don't think we
actually haven't posted about one of them yet.
Yeah, we talked about Neil and Candace on our last podcast.
We did.
Yeah. So this weekend, though, we had a really exciting milestone because our very first ever matched couple got engaged.
Back in like August of 2020.
October
of 2023.
Correct. Yeah. So Nathan and Hannah were our very first Synchrony date.
Yep.
And they
were quite the guinea pigs.
Yeah. And it was a one and done thing. Like they met and it was off to the races. And they're younger.
Yeah.
They're in their early 20s. So they took it slow, and they also worked through a long distance relationship. She's way up in the cold, snowy north, and he's down here close to where we are. And they've just been very, very patient and responsible and have made great choices. And I could not be prouder of them.
Yeah. We are very excited.
Yeah, they're beautiful
and it's
together.
Also kind of like a wrapping up of a beautiful story.
Yeah, it's so nice to see that come to full circle and kind of like them step into that next chapter. So we're pumped for them. And then on this very same weekend, Kristen and John got engaged.
Yeah.
And their story is amazing because, I mean, for a host of reasons, but John, I'd love at some point for us to get to sit down and talk to him about his experience. John is a single dad.
Yep.
And has been a single parent for most of his son's life, and talks about the highs and lows of that. He had to make some very, very difficult decisions.
Yeah.
You know, for the benefit of his son, for the good of his relationship with him early on, that, you know, put him sort of in a challenging position in the dating space.
Yeah.
And so he and Kristen met months ago and have just cultivated this beautiful relationship, and their engagement was just gorgeous. They sent us pictures. So yeah, I'm super pumped for them and for the family that they've created.
Yeah. Congratulations, both couples.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah.
We're at the point where I'm like, it feels like the flywheel is beginning to turn.
Yeah.
Momentum is building.
Not that it's about numbers, but is that 6 or 7?
Yeah, we're like I'm gunning for 10 engagements.
Yeah.
Before we get to the end of the year. I think we'll be well within that.
Yeah, because we have a couple other couples percolating right now.
Percolating. Yeah, they're still going through their process. There's no pressure. No pressure.
No pressure.
No, but it's been great. It's been great to see that start to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm just excited for them. So this is going to be kind of a special podcast tonight.
Yep.
You're not really in this video very much.
Very much at all. Besides the intro and the outro.
Yeah. I think so. Part of this, there's two reasons why I wanted to do this talk. One, we're sitting down with a community member. Her name is Beth, and I've gotten to know her through working with her, and I just wanted to highlight her and how brilliant she is. And I want to do more of that, where we meet with people who are part of the Synchrony community and talk to them about just their perspective on the single experience, right? She has such an incredible perspective. You'll hear more about this, but she kind of lives in the middle of this Venn diagram of like the medical community and kind of doing her own independent research. And she just has a really cool analytical mind.
Yeah.
Um, so getting her perspective on we're going to talk about loneliness and talk about the single experience and how married people can support singles. It was really great to see that. But yeah, I think the other reason is that I just really want to start, besides just highlighting Beth and how cool and unique her perspective is, I want people to become familiar with the incredible variety of people that we have within our community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully we'll do some more of these where we kind of spotlight folks in our community who have something that we think other people could benefit from.
Yeah.
Um, but we're going to be talking with Beth because she is a pharmacist, and as part of her pharmacy work, she has to do continuing education. And because of her relationship with us and everything that we've been talking about, she took it upon herself to seek out a learning opportunity that was focused on the health impacts of loneliness.
Okay.
So she went to this seminar and did a deep dive on this research. And I want to be really clear, like Beth is going to be talking about stuff that she heard at this seminar that is not her research. So we're kind of getting it sort of third hand, right?
Yeah.
We're hearing about her interaction with this data and how it impacted her.
Yeah.
So I don't want anyone to take that. We're going to lay out some stats that she heard, some interesting studies that were mentioned, and we're going to link at least one of them in the description for reference. Um, but I don't want anyone to hear this as, Beth putting herself out there as a researcher. She was very insistent on making sure that we understood that. She is interpreting this data for us, and it's really interesting to hear her perspective as someone who is both single and involved in the medical community.
Yeah. That's super cool.
Yeah. She's also just really fun to talk to. So it was fun to sit down and chat.
Well, I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah. All right. Without further ado, we'll introduce you to Beth.
Beth.
Well, my name is Beth, and I have been a part of the Synchrony community now for probably 6 months or so, I think. It's been
Yeah.
about 6 months. And I stumbled upon the Synchrony project. I say by accident, but I'm sure it was definitely a God thing. So I
Hey,
remember.
happy accidents. We're here for it.
Yes, actually. So I remember I was sitting at a friend's house and we were having a conversation once again about, being an older single person in church and, just having a, conversation at her house. And she had mentioned another podcast, Dear Young Married Couple, actually,
Mm-hmm.
and which I had actually listened to from time to time. Of course, it doesn't always apply to me as a single person, but they do some episodes that definitely apply to either single people or people who desire to be married at one point.
Yeah.
So she was actually referencing another episode about an older single person and their path to marriage and kind of how God unfolded that for them. And so she was just encouraging me to listen to that. And so then I got in my car and I turned on the podcast, and actually it was not the episode that I was thinking that it was not the one that I started to play in the car. So it was actually the one where you and Stephen were interviewing the couple that started Your Young Married Couple. So
Yeah.
it was all about the Synchrony project. And I was like, oh, I think God maybe wanted me to listen to this. So then,
I love it.
I did a little research and I decided to sign up. So I love this community. I think it's an amazing project. I think it's definitely needed. I love, all of the things that you guys, the resources that you provide, the service, the matchmaking. I think it's an incredible thing, and it's long overdue. So I'm excited that there's somebody that has a burden for this and is doing this. And I guess aside from how I found Synchrony Project, my career is actually I'm a pharmacist. So I have a pretty strong science background, medical background. I have a bachelor's degree in environmental science, and then of course I have a doctorate degree in pharmacy, and then I also have a certified health coach through the um, or the integrative nutrition program, and then I also teach on the side. So I teach naturopathic physicians pharmacology and also medical ethics. And
Nice.
so just have, a really strong science background. And yeah, that's my career. I'm originally from the state of Montana. I was born and raised there, and I currently reside in the state of Arizona.
I love it, and it's been such a delight to have you in the community, not just because it's been great to work with you and, work to find matches, but also I think because you and I share a bit of a penchant for, like, citizen science, I'll put it that way, where, like, we kind of get stuck on a topic and it's easy for us to go down rabbit holes. It's easier for us to go down rabbit holes together, I feel like, when we're chatting, because 'cause we'll be like, "Oh, I saw this research about this, and it's so exciting." So, this happened when we were checking in recently, and you brought up this amazing, research that you had come across, and it dovetails so well with, the work that we do and how we talk about loneliness and the impact of loneliness. And I know that you've got a perspective of, thinking about health at a holistic level, thinking about the physical body and its interaction with, more than just blood vessels and pharmacology. It exists in an ecosystem. And I'm just curious to get your perspective on this. So do you mind talking us through how you came across this interesting data on loneliness and just sort of what your experience hearing it was?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you and Stephen had put out the survey for
Mm,
all of, it wasn't just the Synchrony community. You would encourage us to share it with our friends, with our church family,
mm,
with any single adult that's in church. And, you wanted all of that data. You wanted to do the survey. So I remember, I think it was in February, you guys had, you know, published your podcast about your results that you had found.
yeah,
And to me, it wasn't, well, it was, I guess you could say shocking. It was also not surprising.
yeah,
So I knew that the data that you were going to generate from that survey was going to be pretty profound. And I think
mm,
that, when you discovered that there was, 75% of people in church do not feel like their loneliness is being ministered to, and that 98% of
mm,
participants felt like there is not sufficient dating options. That's, a staggering number, but yet that's also what, a lot of us single adults in church experience. So those numbers to me were
yeah,
not particularly shocking. However, I just really, something kind of just, I don't know, got a hold of my heart, I think, at that time. And just really wanting to convey just the loneliness aspect of being an older, or being a single person in church,
yeah,
because it's so driven around families and connections. And when you don't have your person, or you don't have, per se, a family of your own that's in your current church, it really can just be incredibly a lonely experience.
yeah,
And if you don't have people that really know how to minister to that, it's just even more magnified. And so I just, really got a heart for loneliness in that moment when you guys were doing that podcast episode. And so, and sure enough, another thing that, I felt like this was a God thing, but as a pharmacist and as
mm,
a person who is in the medical community, I get a lot of emails and invites and things like that for continuing education credits to
mhm,
be required for my license. And so there's one company in particular that I particularly enjoy. They do a lot of really great classes that are live. And there's one of my state licenses actually requires me to have live continuing education. So, but what really caught my attention was the title of this, with this new continuing education course, was The Epidemic of Loneliness.
yeah,
And I just thought, oh my goodness, I have really got to see what this is about. And, I want to know what the research says, and does it fall in line with what Megan and Stephen have, with their survey? Does it fall in line with what they've discovered within the church? And so I signed up and I took the course. I think it's been a couple of weeks now.
mm.
Uh, but the results were absolutely just staggering. And they really do fall in line with, they do support the data that you and Stephen have also concluded with your survey as well.
Yeah, because we're talking about the survey, one of the things that we found, besides the fact that it was just so you know, kind of almost universal, right? This experience of we had a handful of singles who said that they didn't experience loneliness. And I was going back and looking at this. 2% of the respondents said that they weren't really experiencing significant loneliness. And we're super excited for that small group of people, right?
Yes.
But the vast majority of singles who responded are experiencing loneliness to some degree. And many of them are experiencing extreme or severe loneliness where they feel like it's something that they encounter almost on a daily basis. And then we asked this question of, you know, do like how does loneliness affect them somatically? How does it affect their bodies? Because we know, now like there's such a connection with your mind, your emotions, and your experience, your nerves, your experience of pain and sensation in the body. Those things go together. And there's really interesting data around that. And a significant number of people experience physical pain as a result of that loneliness, where they're actually hurting in their bodies, because of what they're experiencing and kind of the isolation that they feel. So talk to me about like the data that stood out to you from this. Like what were some of the stats or some of the claims that you kind of made you feel like, oh wow, this is really lining up.
Sure. So I just want to validate the physical pain part of
Mm,
that. And if in your mind you're feeling, a lack of connection, because
yeah.
loneliness really at its root, at its core, is lack of connection. And if
Hmm.
you don't have your person, if you don't have that connection, and within a relationship, there's physical touch, and there's things like, that aspect of a relationship. If you're missing out on that and you desire that for your life, then there is some evidence to support that, yes, you can possibly feel physical pain. But besides that, there's a lot of research that supports that, actually there's a 29% increased risk for heart disease.
Wow.
So the numbers that I'm actually going to give you right now, so these were actually reported by the Surgeon General. So in
Mm,
2023, he actually had this huge document that anyone can actually access online about the epidemic of loneliness. So a lot of this data is coming from his research. And so there's that 29% increase for heart disease. There's a 32% increased risk of stroke, and there's a 26% increase overall for earlier death. And it's actually equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes per day. But as mind blowing as that data is, the one that I think really hit me the most was that there is a 50% increase risk for dementia.
wow. That's wild.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. I mean, obviously, it would take so long to study that and understand the effects of it, but, like, did anyone try to I guess, did anyone have theories, or do you feel like you could kind of, like I can sort of understand why if that major part of our mind, right, that, like, connects us socially and engages with people around us is not activated, why that would, you know, lend itself to that, but I wonder what else is at play.
Yeah, so I actually wondered that myself, because, everything else was kind of in that, 25 to 30% range. And to
Yeah.
me, that seems okay, that kind of makes sense. But when they said a 50% increased risk for dementia, I think my jaw was on the floor. And I could not wrap my brain around how that could possibly be. And I was actually a little disappointed that they didn't go into further, information about, particularly why it was so staggeringly high for dementia. And then
Yeah.
I did actually find the Surgeon General's results online, and I went
Mm,
through that as well. And there was not a whole lot of information on particularly why there was such a larger increase for
yeah.
dementia. However, that said, I am really curious about that, and I would like to explore more of that within like the next few weeks.
Yeah,
And if
and
I have an answer, I will definitely, get back to you.
yeah, I'm super curious. I imagine, not being a part of this research at all, but I imagine that that's probably something they have to track longitudinally, where they would have had to, looked at a population early on and then tracked them into their later years, and it's possible that that's difficult to do, when you start a project, but I'm fascinated by that, and I think one thing I wanna kinda call out that people might be saying in their head right now is like, "Okay, well, but Megan, loneliness doesn't just come from singleness," which I think is true, right? Like you said, we're defining loneliness here as a lack of connection. But at the same time, I think that in our modern context, we rely on our partners for so much more connection than people did historically. Because I think that we've really isolated the nuclear family. We've gotten really, um, friendship is more difficult, I think, in our current space. I think that it's very easy to exist in a silo if you're not working in person with people or commuting with people or doing, going to the gym with people and having these sort of social connections. It's very difficult, even in church sometimes, like you might not interact with the people that sit all the way across the auditorium from you. So I feel like that connection and that touch and those things that really uh, tap into that human desire for contact with another human, we rely on our dating partners and our spouses for that maybe more than we ever have because of how isolated we're becoming in our day-to-day lives. So that's not to say that single people can't experience connection, but if we're putting more dependency on our partners and we're not creating more opportunities for connection among everyone, right? Then I feel like we're still just increasing that risk of them falling into really, really profound loneliness and all the spin-off effects of that.
Yes, and the course, it did talk about that as well. So they
Mm,
did talk about, three different types of loneliness. So there's loneliness within a marriage. So they did
mm,
actually talk about how, a poor marriage,
yeah.
you can be extremely lonely, which is, what the work that you guys are trying to prevent is you want good, solid marriages where, you're aligned on your values. And I love that. And so, you can have that type of loneliness, or you can have that type of loneliness because you don't have that type of relationship. But
Mhm.
they also did talk about how you can have loneliness from not having friendships. And they did talk about how some ways to kind of, some reasons for that is, if you live in a large city, a lot of times you live several miles apart.
Yeah.
People live very far apart from friends. You can meet at church once or twice a week, but when you go home, then you might be several miles away, and that person, it might be very difficult to meet up with that person. They also talked about just social media and how that
Mhm.
has influenced our friendships, and how we've actually have weaker ties because of social media. Not that there's anything wrong with social media. I'm not here to say that there's anything wrong with it. It's a
Yeah.
great tool as long as it's used correctly.
Mhm.
And it's great when you reach out to somebody on social media and you say, hey, let's meet up for coffee.
Mhm.
But also we're using it to sort of have like the pseudo connection with people. And so we're not actually having true connection. And one of the things that I do want to mention in just any type of relationship is, that kind of goes along with social media, is there's some studies that actually, I think, report that people touch their phones or access their phones like around 1,000 times a day, or
Mhm.
hundreds of times per day, or that we're actually in a 24-hour day, we are online or on our phones for at least 6 of those hours, which
Yeah.
is huge number, right? So there is some, evidence to support that when it's kind of like an addiction, right? It's just
Mhm.
like this automatic, we're reaching for our phones day in and day out. And what that's actually doing is triggering a dopamine release for some people. So we're getting this constant dopamine release, which is involved in pleasure and reward, and then it wears off very quickly. And so then you constantly want to reach for that and have that little bit of dopamine release again. But what we're replacing is true connection, which is generating oxytocin, which
Yeah.
is what we need for connection with another human being, whether that's a friend or that's a spouse. That is, a bonding hormone that makes us feel loved, that makes us feel connected. And I think that social media, a great tool, it is creating this, too much dopamine, and we're not actually getting all of the oxytocin that, makes us feel loved, makes us feel connected. And so that to me was also a staggering statistic to find out that, potentially some of us are reaching for our phones 1,000 times a day. And that was just crazy to me. So they did talk about, putting down your phone a little bit, maybe doing a social media detox for 30 days. They also
Yeah.
talked about another interesting thing that they talked about was actually the 8-minute phone call. They
Mm.
that there's a lot of evidence to support all it takes is 8 minutes on a phone with a friend to make them feel remembered, to make them feel connected. And
Yeah.
so I would encourage people, if there is a lonely single person in your church and you recognize that and you have a connection with them or you're desiring to make a connection with them, it may not be that you just have to reach out to them at your church. It could be, you know what, maybe on Thursdays, you pick a day that works for both of you and you say, I'm going to call you on Thursdays at this time if you have 8 minutes. And that can actually really make a person feel connected, feel cared for, feel loved. And, if you get into a conversation, they do say to, schedule a time where you can go, meet at a place or you can have a longer conversation. But they did talk about how really it only takes 8 minutes for that person to feel remembered. And I thought that was
Wow.
some incredible, data on, it doesn't necessarily take a whole lot for some of us to feel connected. And just if we could remember that with your single adults in your church, just that, for some of us, just a once a week 8 minute phone call can go a really long way.
That's so good, and that's such an actionable thing for churches to latch onto, like, that's something that could easily be an initiative for the singles leader or for the young adult leader or for the anyone who's ministering to widows in the church, like, 8 minutes is approachable, right? But you also as you were talking about it, I was thinking like, okay, all of these factors that are making it, easier and easier for people to lose that human connection are all the same reasons why dating is getting harder because, if if we're training our brains to seek dopamine, right? Which on an online space, which is where a lot of dating interactions are happening, it's likes, it's comments, it's DMs, right? But we're not experiencing the potential for oxytocin exchange, which in early dating, if you look at like the work of Helen Fisher, that's showing up in things like extended eye contact, right?
Mhm.
Physical proximity. The things that signal to our brains to start releasing that bonding hormone have to do with the sound of the other person's voice, and their body postures and the interactions in a shared space that make people feel very safe. You really can't have those over a DM in the same way.
You cannot. And the other thing that I just thought of as we were talking about this is how I think one of the things that's happening within, having these DMs or these or even text messaging relationships, right? So, we kind of if we're not communicating on the phone or if we're not having, real interaction, then a lot of people, rely on text messaging and you don't see the person's facial expressions, you don't see
Mhm.
that. But they also talk about how, you know, that can be like an attachment style dysfunction and
Mm,
how we are thinking that we get if that person doesn't text you the next day or
yeah.
we kind of get anxious and then we worry that, oh no, did I say something wrong in a text message? And it's not a good idea to just have rely on social media, DMs and text messaging, because that's really highlighting our attachment dysfunction. And to really have a secure attachment with somebody, it cannot be over multiple text messages per day. It has
No.
got to be in person at some point. And
Mhm.
yes, I know with the Synchrony project, there's obviously you're not connecting people necessarily that are in their same church or their same town.
Right.
So you've got to have even video interaction that's at least showing your facial expressions and things like
Mhm.
that, so you're kind of getting to know that person on a deeper level rather
Yeah.
than just through a screen that you can't see. So
Yeah.
I think that really highlights just how important it is to have that face to face secure attachment with somebody.
It's so important, and like you said, I mean, I don't think a video call could ever substitute what it's like to interact with someone in person, and we talk about that when you go into synchrony dates, like, when you're dating through, like, I don't know, what do you call it, like, the synchrony method, I guess. It sounds way more, like, highfalutin than I mean it to, but when you're doing that, you have to, um like, you have to acknowledge that you're not going to key in on the same signals that you normally would in a regular dating relationship. Like, you're not going to experience the butterflies and the, tingly skin that you might if you were meeting this person in person for the first time. So, like, you have to kind of release yourself of the expectation that you're going to feel all the things that we've been taught to feel when that spark happens or you feel that chemistry. Because chemistry, people like treat it like this very magical sort of experience. But I think like we describe it as feeling seen, safe, and mutually curious, right?
Yeah.
And it comes from that experience of safety that's signaled by someone's body language, it's signaled by the kind of words they're using, it's signaled by their active listening that you at least need to be having over a phone call, like, at minimum, I think, in order to experience that at all.
Yes. And one of the things that, this course talked about was the benefits of if you're struggling to connect with somebody in person, or if you let's say you're meeting either a new person through Synchrony for the first time in
Mm.
person, or even if you're out there and you're meeting a new friend for the first time and you want to connect with that person. One of the things they said, the best things to do in those early stages is if you can go for a walk or a car ride with this person.
Mm.
How there's something that just happens to our brains. It's like we're thinking about either the walk, like we're not totally necessarily focused on the person next to us. It's kind of a little bit of a distraction,
Yeah.
and how we're not, there's not this tension to like have this intense eye contact with the person if things are a little bit awkward, especially initially.
Mm,
But
mhm.
they did say that there is a whole lot of data to support if you can go on either a walk with this person or if you can go on a long car ride with this person. It is absolutely amazing the in-depth conversations that you can have with somebody else during those times, because there's just that little bit of distraction, but
Yeah.
the person is so willing to open up because they're also a little bit distracted and there's not that pressure of this direct eye contact. So I thought that was some really good advice.
I love that advice, and it's like, you're a part of this shared activity for however long the walk or the drive is gonna last, where neither of you has any other obligations for doing other things in the meantime too. Like, it's you're not at a restaurant having to interact with wait staff or making sure you get off the you get away from the table so someone else can step in. Like, you're not having to be socially present in any other way except for this one interaction that's nicely contained within this walk or within this car ride. That's really funny, and I feel like that tracks. Steven and I, we talk about how I didn't know it was a date at the time because you've heard us talk about how I didn't think Steven was into me. I thought we were just hanging out. But we went on like a 2-hour walk at one point around like this random neighborhood and talked about everything under the sun, and it was so great because you just had this kind of rhythm of moving together without really needing to do anything else or feeling like you had the pressure to do anything else. Um, so that makes sense. I want to circle back because I feel like we kind of skated over some of the early like stats about the health impacts of loneliness.
So yes.
And as like someone who spends time in the medical field, you're talking to holistic doctors, you're kind of in this space of thinking about like health and healing. What did those mean to you? Like what was kind of like the impact that you had when you were hearing all these stats about the health detriments of this?
So for me, um, just working in the medical community is that I really see a whole lot of people with a chronic illness
Mm,
already.
mm,
And chronic illness is a risk factor for loneliness by itself. And so if you have somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of family, they don't have a caretaker, they just don't have somebody there with them that's walking by them side by side in their health journey, and they have a chronic illness, then you have now just not only now you've essentially added another layer of an increased risk factor. So they're already lonely, they're already dealing with a chronic illness, which already puts them at risk for being lonely. But now we have on top of that additional risk factors, that additional 30 to 50% to develop something else, particularly because they're lonely and they don't have a connection. And there is an absolute need for people when they are chronically ill to have somebody there with them, but also just, to maybe just go sit with somebody and just remember,
mm.
to remind them that, hey, like you haven't been forgotten. I'm here with you. But it's just absolutely staggering to my mind to think that if somebody is in a condition that is already a risk factor for loneliness, and then on top of that, we're adding even more risk factors for an earlier death, or for them to have some other, you know, something health happen to them, they develop heart disease or they have a stroke, and it's not necessarily because of the original illness, it's because they're chronically lonely in their chronic illness.
Yeah. And I wonder too, like, I like to think about confounding variables, which if anyone here is not a stats nerd, good for you. Live a happy life without being a stats nerd. It's a lot. But if you are a stats nerd, then you know confounding variables are this idea that like we can see a correlation between two things, but there might be other underlying factors that we haven't measured that are playing into it. So like the typical example is we know that ice cream sales positively associate with drowning deaths, right? The confounding variable, of course, is summer, that both of those things increase during a specific season, right? I wonder too about the confounding variable of just what being alone means for someone's ability to take care of themselves. Because I think about the singles that I talk to, and I mean like young, healthy singles, right? But who are carrying so much stress and so much responsibility for all of the all of the management of their day-to-day lives, right? Like they're the ones who are responsible for all their food preparation, all their financial health. Like and that burden by itself adds a ton of stress. We know that stress adds a tremendous amount of risk to health in general. Like there's good data around that anyway, just what actual constant exposure to stress does to the body. Not to mention like being in a nuclear family where you have constant access to each other is one of the ways that you stay healthy, you know? I mean like humans, like, we can only see half of our bodies at any given time. You need someone else to point out that you have a weird looking mole to make sure that you go get it taken care of,
Yes,
you know? Like, there are so many things like that that are just small ways that isolation could chip away at someone's ability to really, uh, pay attention to taking care of themselves or prioritize it. Because how do you prioritize that when you're just trying to stay afloat in the economy the way it is? Like, being single is hard, you know?
absolutely. And there is, I love that what you said about just that when you're in a state of chronic, you know, or you're single, you've been single for so long, and now it's not just the loneliness, but it's also the weight that you carry of your everyday life of, you're having to carry the weight of the finances and figure that out on your own, or unless you have some family members that you can of course reach out to, or friends that are very savvy about that. um, but just that in that day to day just living, there isn't somebody there beside you saying, hey, when's the last time you made a doctor's appointment? When's the last time you did something to prioritize your own health, because
Yeah.
you're so worried about just the things that have to get done on a day to day basis.
Yeah. It's huge, and I don't think we've, you know, really counted that up, and it's funny, like, I talk to singles. I don't know if this has been your experience, but I talk to singles who, um, feel that their church doesn't necessarily understand their experience or that the married people around them don't understand, and when we did the From Singles to Shepherd survey, like, some of the responses that we got, more than one person said something to the effect of, I'm really tired of people telling me, "Oh, you have so much time on your hands," or, "Oh, you're so lucky to get to go do the things that you wanna do," because it undermines the real cost of that lonely experience, right? Like, yes, theoretically, a single doesn't have to deal with the schedule of several other family members, but at what cost to their health and their well-being and, their day-to-day life? And I feel like this is a place where if the church recognized the significance of the loneliness, what it meant for people's spiritual health, what it meant for their physical health, and saw it as the problem that it is, like, the devastating problem that it is, we could try to step in with it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I do want to point out that, to me, I think what is so just, how can we help sort of remedy this? you
Yeah.
know 75% of respondents feel like their church does not understand their loneliness or is not ministering to their loneliness.
Mhm.
So I mean, that's a huge number, right? Like, there's no getting around that. That's just a staggering number. But I think what we have to do, it really starts with recognizing, first of all, recognizing that we have a problem.
Mm,
And once we recognize that we have a problem, then we can really work to destigmatize the loneliness experience,
yeah.
right? And that is when we can say, wow, I'm so sorry that we have not addressed your loneliness. I'm so sorry that you've had this long-term experience and nobody understands how you feel. And one of the, this has come up in conversation amongst, people in my church community. In fact, one time, I think the worst experience I've ever had as a single person in church
Mm.
and somebody not understanding my loneliness was I actually had somebody tell me, what is there to minister to?
Wow. That is so hard, Beth.
That was the absolute most harsh thing I think I have ever heard, because she didn't have this experience that I did, where, she got married very young, she had her children very young, and she has never been, single, for her entire adult life pretty much. And so
Yeah.
she just truly could not identify, she just could not identify why, what is there to be sad about? Like, she essentially told me, well, what is there to be sad about? You're single, you're free, you have no obligations, you can go out and do whatever you want. And it's like, except for I have a desire for my life that's actually from God and it's not being fulfilled. So now this is a burden. And I would like you to recognize that this is a burden and help me pray.
Yeah.
And that's what you can minister to. And also, the way that I've come to think about this in terms of, we've got the singles on one side and then we've got the married couples on the other side, is
Mhm.
that I think I would really like for the married people to understand that part of the stigma is that in church we have sort of elevated marriage, right? As to somehow you have arrived
Mm,
somewhere that is somehow better than being single. And, that is the ultimate, right? Like, that once you get married, you have arrived. And so I think that creates us to feel bad about where we are in life. And the
mm,
way that I want to explain this to people is, if you could think of two classrooms. On one classroom, you've got the singles in your church. And then in the other classroom, you have the married couples. And I don't want you to think of the married couples as the senior class and the single people as the freshman class, right?
right.
We are both we're in different classrooms, but Jesus is the same teacher.
Yeah.
And if the people in the married classroom could understand that at any given point in time, they could enter that single classroom.
We are one we are one accident, one breath away from every single married couple being exactly in the same place that every single person in their church is. And no one wants to think too hard about that, and I get why,
Yeah.
but there it is such a tenuous experience. And what you said is so important. Like, if you're a married person who went from living in your family home to living in the home that you built with your spouse, you have no idea, respectfully, what
Yes.
it means to live alone and manage life alone. Like, and I don't mean to rile up anyone who's listening to this who was fortunate enough to have that experience. Like, it's wonderful.
Yes. We're happy for them.
We're happy for them, and we like, it's great. But they can't have an idea. I mean, I don't have an idea, like, I lived by myself for a whole couple of years in grad school, and it was terrible. I was it was horrible. I got a cat, so I didn't have to come home and be lonely for those 2 measly years that I was in graduate school. Like, people don't get it, and I think my heart's really broken um for singles who have had that experience of feeling completely unseen in their grief and loneliness. And not everyone has that experience. Thank God we have, ministry that is supportive of singles and understands, and we have ministry that's walked that path, and and they kind of champion it. But a lot of us are able to go through life ignoring the reality that so many people are experiencing loneliness and that we're only a breath away from experiencing it too. And we distance ourselves from it because it scares us, I think.
Yes. And the other thing I think that really, got a hold of my heart was when I realized that if we cannot minister to the people within the four walls of our church, and we have a lost world to win, and
Mm-hmm.
we want the lost world to come into our churches, and how are we going to minister to their loneliness? And if we cannot minister to the people that have been inside our churches for decades.
Yeah. Because it's the same, the thing about it is the research that's being done about the loneliness epidemic is being done in the world.
Exactly.
Like it's the same that they recognize it and it's affecting the church too. And if they see it in us unmitigated, like, and that isn't to say that the Holy Ghost doesn't bring a comfort and that the
Right.
world doesn't have. But still, we should be the happiest, most connected family on earth
Right.
as
People should be coming to our churches to find that connection,
yeah.
to find a person that they can count on, to find that they have a connection with somebody, and it not
Mhm.
necessarily even just in the romantic setting, but
Yeah.
just a friendship, or a mentor. And if we are not able to do this inside the walls of our church, then I don't know how we can expect to minister to the people out in the world that are just as lonely.
Mm.
And we talk about how in your results, how many, what I think it was like 39% have thought about leaving the church.
Yeah.
Well, it's not going to be any better outside of the church. You might have found that, maybe you found a spouse that's not in the church. And I understand that desire, because maybe you do have a lot of values, except for you don't have the same apostolic beliefs. But I understand why somebody would leave for that connection. But that
Yeah.
is a temporary thing. You know and if you leave the church and you're hoping to find that connection out in the world, it's really actually not any better.
No. And I think the thing that I want, well, actually, before I say that, let me ask this. If you could sort of pull together a single sentence, if a minister or someone who's really active in the church is involved in the church is listening to this and you want them to take away one thing, like what's the statement or the action that you would want to hand them going forward? And that's a lot of pressure, but I trust you.
I Well, when I was told what is there to minister to, I
Mm,
think the thing that came to my mind was, what you said it. We're all one breath away from loneliness, and
mhm.
I would just really ask that people who are in good marriages that don't struggle with loneliness is to really just try to put yourself in our shoes. And
Yeah.
if you cannot put yourself in our shoes, then still, recognize that I might not have this experience, but that I want to help destigmatize this experience in church.
Yes. Yes. And I think to put some legs on that, like I would love it if um married people would get upset on behalf of their single brothers and sisters when other married people called them picky or
Mm,
called them, you know, like unwilling to go look or called them it whatever. Like the stereotypes just to like because I know that this is bouncing around in people's heads, right? The stereotypes that get thrown around in church in front of and not in front of singles are hurting us. They're perpetuating that stigma. They're perpetuating that sense of married superiority. Like,
yes, just put yourself out there,
right.
or I think you guys did a podcast about all of the
The
things that
cliches, yeah. There's
cliches.
plenty of fish in the sea. Like, well, which ocean are you fishing in? Like, when
Sure, exactly.
realistically, the majority of people in church who found someone found them because they went to the same church. Like, not everybody, don't come at me, but I think the stats would hold up to that those people attended church together at some point in the great majority. So the fact that someone has not found someone yet does not mean they are doing anything wrong. The body has to heal the body. I'm saying this as if you don't know this being in the medical field, but like, like the body's job is to heal that wounded member, right? We have a responsibility. The married people have a responsibility that I think we could step into more.
And the other thing that I would like to point out is um, I'm reminded in scripture that when, God said in the book of Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone.
Mm,
And at that time, that was the pre fallen world. If Adam was lonely before sin had entered the world and
mm,
he was in perfect communion with God and he was lonely, and God said, "It is not good for you to be alone." you know, Now we're in the fallen world, right? And
mm,
it's also not good that we're alone. And
yeah.
I really wish that my prayer is that the married people would come alongside us and recognize that if Adam was struggling in a pre fallen world, then how much more are we struggling in a fallen world?
Yeah, it tracks so well. We just spoke to Dr. Joshua Abrego a couple weeks ago, and when he talked about the fact that the design of the Lord was for Adam to recognize his loneliness, right? Because
Mhm.
God could have created Adam and Eve simultaneously, already in perfect harmony, but Adam had to recognize in his humanity that he wasn't complete, right? He had to name all the animals first before noticing that there was no one for him,
Right.
so that he understood the value of that partnership. Like, and I don't believe that it's God's desire for anyone to be lonely. Again, like we don't preach that that's something that God wants people to go through, that it has to be a season. I believe what that was showing us is that humans have to recognize their need for other people. And,
Absolutely.
singles, like, even if the partner hasn't shown up yet or the match hasn't shown up yet, and I know that as I'm saying this, it's hard to even ask this, but the maintain those ties that you're keeping to your church community and to the friendships that are there. We need to do better to married people need to do better to connect with singles. But singles, I don't want you to give up on us either. Like, don't let
Right.
go.
Right, like I think it's just that you don't want us single people to get frustrated and bitter with you because you're in a place that we're not. um
Yeah, and I mean, on the whole, I don't feel like many single people are there. You can correct me
so,
if I'm wrong about this. But I think single people feel bad about, like, sometimes, what I hear is like guilt of like, I don't want to bother my married friends, like they have lives. Like, no, y'all, bother us. Like, bother us and annoy us and make us step out of our cozy little hole in the sand that we buried our heads in. Like,
mm,
like, you shouldn't have to be the person who maintains that or the people that maintain that, but like it's valuable to us. It's not gonna, true friends are not gonna be bothered by that. Um,
and that is
and
that's very true. I'm sorry for interrupting, but
no,
I
not
just
at
want
all.
to say that so I have an incredible friend
Yeah.
in the state that I'm from, Montana. She's an amazing person, and she was not always in church. She got in church in her like mid to late 20s, I want to say.
Mm,
But she had been in church, but she was also, she married a man when she got in church, after she got in church. But she had spent a lot of her time in the world as a single person.
mm,
And when she got to church, she was really searching for that partner and that companionship and that connection. And God did provide, a husband for her. But one of the things that I'm always just so thankful for in our friendship is that one time she told me, she said, you know, I, she identifies with my loneliness and the hurt of not having that person. And she said, I didn't have to wait as long as you did, but that doesn't mean that I didn't feel as much pain.
mm,
And she recognizes, she remembers that pain of the loneliness.
yeah.
And if you're a married person in church and you are blissfully married, we are so happy for you. But did you also spend a season of prolonged singleness, and have you forgotten what that's like because you're
Mm,
now blissfully married? I would just encourage people that if you did experience, a season, either of divorce, or, you lost a spouse through death, and or you had a prolonged, unexpected single season, then just if you could just remember that pain that you felt,
mm.
and just remember your brothers and sisters that are currently in that state who are desiring a partner.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I pray that this reaches such a wide variety of people. I hope that married people are listening. And if you're a single person, take the opportunity to send this over to some of your married friends that are on board with you so they can share it with their married friends. I think it's really important that married people hear the experience of singleness and engage with it. Um, and I think that it's so important for singles to hear that, you know, we want that experience to be shared. I think that the church has to confront the impact of loneliness the same way we have to confront the impact of addiction or the impact of oppression. I think that none of those are God's design for us. And like you said, if we want to work in a fallen world and be the light and be the city on a hill and be the salt of the earth, we have to taste and look different than what the world has to offer. And if the world is crippled by isolation and loneliness, then we should demonstrate the cure, right? Which isn't necessarily marriage, it's connection with
Right,
another.
and I wanna highlight that it's
Yeah.
that it's I was having this conversation with my pastor's wife about how,
Mhm.
I was just there was one day in particular where I was so burdened by loneliness, and I was burdened for, people that were having a loneliness experience, and I remember telling her, I said, "And you know what?" I said, the cure isn't necessarily a marriage because a marriage could be months, it could be years down the road for
Mhm.
these individuals. But what we need right now is for somebody to recognize our loneliness and minister to us in this current state. We need somebody to walk alongside us and just if they could remember what it was like to be single, if they had that experience, and just come alongside us and really just recognize that we are hurting and that they do want to walk alongside us in this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for all of the thoughts that you brought. Thank you for taking the research that you got exposed to and sharing it. I know that I didn't mean to put you in the hot seat of making you like the spokesperson for the scientific community here, but I appreciate that you're the kind of person who loves to like kind of dig your teeth into that and really figure out what the value is for the church. And there's so much here that I feel like we could take and churches could apply and really make a difference. So I'm grateful for you for that. And I'm just grateful that we got to sit down and chat too. I just love talking to you and picking your brain.
Yes, and I recognize that this data isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
But, so I know that you're a data nerd too, and I'm a nerd too, and I
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have taken this course. I probably wouldn't have, paid the money to take this course if there wasn't an incentive to get the required continuing education credits for my license. That was definitely an incentive, but also it is part of, it is my heartbeat to minister to single people. So I
Yeah.
was and then the fact that you guys had done your own survey, and I was like, well, how does this track with what the world is saying? And yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's not any better.
No, I think it's so cool to see all the different sort of streams of thought coming together and saying the same thing. And yeah, it's a good wake up call. So I'm grateful to you and I just love getting to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time for this and letting us pick your
Absolutely.
brain.
Yes,
Love
of
it.
course. Thank you. And I just, I pray for your ministry, and I'm excited to see what God is going to do in this.
Oh, thank you so much.
That was so good.
Right. She had a lot of just great things to say. And she's just so like warm
Yeah.
and approachable. Um, yeah, I really love chatting with her.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I gotta say, the idea that we could actually give some actionable items for married couple and friends
Mm,
to help with the loneliness
yeah.
is a super cool concept.
It's really helpful because I think that sometimes, and I kind of want to unpack this in its own episode. Like, um, we've gotten well-meaning and well-intentioned feedback and
Yeah.
critique. That like, hey, if we focus so much on loneliness, we're putting people in the molly grubs, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I don't necessarily think that's true, but I do think it is really important to have actions that we can
Yeah.
take.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, how often have we've done a couple talks already on loneliness and people are like, well, what can we do?
Yeah.
And obviously there's like ministries we can start and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like a single ministry event once or twice a month isn't going to ultimately cure loneliness.
No.
So it's a bunch of friends and married friends and other single friends giving an 8-minute phone call, or, you know, you don't have to have it down to the minute or down to the second, but giving it a 10-minute phone call
Right.
and knowing that you could potentially be doing a lot of good just with that conversation.
Yeah. It was great to hear a lot of the things that we've been discussing backed up by research,
Yeah.
and also just, understanding that what we're experiencing in the church is not unique to the church.
Yeah.
The world as a whole is wrestling with this loneliness issue. But like Beth said, like, we should be a place where people come and people from the world come and they see how connected we are.
Yeah.
We should be standing in defiance of that trend as apostolics.
Yeah. This is a whole nother podcast episode idea, but like when you were giving your talk on Sunday
Mm.
to the department heads.
Yeah, we met with the leadership team in West Palm.
Yeah. Something that came up that is a whole separate issue in and of itself is the loneliness that someone may feel as a new convert.
Yeah.
Because we talk about a lot about loneliness in the church of existing saints.
Right, people who've been there a long time.
But an even compounding factor is someone who is a new convert, especially if they're not coming with a spouse or coming with
Right.
family. They have found this new doctrine that they feel is something that was worth investigating.
Yeah.
And now they're coming into a church where they know no one, and they're also having to change all of their behaviors and all of their mindsets away from friends and family members that they've grown up with their whole life. So like the whole that just kind of started like really eating at me and made me really start praying about it. Like that is a whole nother factor of loneliness that I haven't really considered.
Yeah, and as a church, I mean, I think the takeaway from what Beth and I talked about, this is a problem for the whole church.
Yeah.
Right? It's a problem. Loneliness is an issue that all of us have to be thinking about and taking ownership of and working to address. And I'm not here to, the church is full of humans.
Oh, sure.
We will always have brokenness, and we
Yeah.
should, right? We are meant to be a hospital for souls. Like,
Absolutely.
we will always have people that are struggling in different aspects, and all of us will struggle with different aspects. I'm not here to say that this is a place where the church should be perfect, but it can't be an area that we ignore.
Oh yeah.
Or that we offload to be just a singles issue to solve.
Yeah.
Or
Absolutely.
just a singles ministry issue to solve.
Yeah.
So that's our call to action. Call up a single friend and chat with them for 8 to 10 minutes. And I just want to say a special thank you to Beth for spending that time with me. I feel so grateful to have the privilege of getting to work with her. It's been such a delight just to get to know her. She just brings so much excitement and joy into her work and into our work. So I'm just really grateful to Beth for taking the time out for this and for going to this seminar and sharing all the knowledge that she gained with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Beth, for being a friend to my wife for an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so true. I don't think we have any big new announcements. Reminder that if you're still interested in coming with us on Singles at Sea next February, the information to contact our travel agent is in the description, and all you got to do is call her to get pricing and details. But you can reserve your cabin for $200, and if you bring a friend and run a room with them, it's just $100 per person.
That's right. For the deposit.
Correct. To reserve the cabin.
Yep.
It costs more to go on the cruise.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a good deal still.
Yep.
I don't think I have anything else on that.
Me either.
Okay.
Hey.
Yeah.
I love you.
I love you too.
And I had a lot of fun this weekend.
I did too. Thank you for.
Despite the 9 or 10 hour round trip.
I was going to say thank you for doing all the driving.
No problem.
I appreciated that.
Well, thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.